Okay, there's no doubt going to be some people wanting to know a little bit about the background between me and my natural father. So I'm just going to give you some bullet points here so that the other video makes a bit more sense. I'll try not to let myself ramble and get bogged down with too many details. Now, I was born in 1962. My sister was born in 1963 to Bruce and Darlene. Okay, and my mom and dad split up when I was, they separated when I was 2 and got divorced when I was 4. And my mom remarried when I was 5. Now, when she got engaged to the new guy, my stepdad, who later on went on to legally adopt my sister and myself. Um, but yeah, back in 1967, early on in 67, when my mom got engaged, it was a done deal back then that the new man took over the role of father in the children's lives, and the real father literally would bow out completely and so forth. The thinking at the time was that it was too confusing for kids to have two sets of parents and two homes, and they didn't want the tug of war. My mom was quite worried about my natural father snatching me and my sister and stuff, so we got legally adopted. And that meant that my natural father no longer had any rights to us whatsoever. And therefore, he couldn't visit us, and he wasn't allowed to call us on the telephone or send us Christmas cards or anything like that. And if he did try to send us any birthday cards or Christmas cards or anything, my stepdad, would intercept them and not even let us know they came. So yeah. Anyway, so I grew up, with a bit of a grudge against my stepdad and my real mom, well, my only mom, for not letting me get to know my real dad. I didn't understand why they thought it would be so confusing. I knew that he was my dad anyway, regardless of the fact I've got a new guy to call dad. I still knew I had a different dad, a real dad, a natural father, whatever you want to call it. Um, I don't think it would have been confusing for me at all. I didn't think so at the time, and I still don't think so now. Anyway, and I really had a chip on my shoulder toward my stepdad and toward my mom for the fact that I couldn't get to know my real father. Later on in my teenage years, my sister did a couple of stupid things and wound up in hospital, and my real dad came out to see her in hospital, and she ended up moving back with him for a while. But that didn't last long for various reasons that I don't really have enough detail on to talk about. Suffice to say, she was out there for, I don't know, about a year or so, and then came back to California. And when she came back to California, she didn't stay for long before she joined the Navy. And our natural father was very proud of her for joining the Navy. And and we I didn't see my dad much, my real father much after I grew up, because he lived in the suburbs of Chicago and I lived 2,000 miles away in California. But whenever he was out that direction, he would come and we'd have a dinner together or something like that. It wasn't very often, maybe 2 or 3 times that might have happened. Anyway, um, when I was a DJ on the radio, my father was quite proud of me for that, and he followed my career with some interest. And when I was working in Alaska, that's when he really started to get interested in it, because I seemed to be sort of hopping around the country on my career. And yeah, so we started talking on the phone quite a bit more often. And when I say a bit more often, I'm talking about several times a year as opposed to once every year or two. Um, and then I moved back to California in '87. And in 1989, when my 27th birthday came along, my mom surprised me and paid for me to go see my father in Chicago, which was great for me. I spent the whole weekend of my 27th birthday with my dad. We went to the Chicago Blues Festival, and during that visit, we sort of cleared the air between us about the previous, 20 years history. I told him that I didn't hold it against him for the fact that I grew up not knowing him, because I always blamed my mom and my stepdad for that. I never actually blamed my dad for it, um, which now that I'm a dad myself, I can see might have been slightly misplaced of me. However, I did not blame him. I totally blamed my stepdad, with a side order of blame for my mom for letting my stepdad make that decision in the first place. Suffice to say, though, I never ever blamed my actual father for it, and I told him so. And I said to him, that I'm not the best at sort of keeping in touch and writing in letters and so on, but that I loved him and I'll try to keep in touch. And then I moved to the UK shortly after that. And for the first few years I was over here, we were quite communicative. We talked several times a year on the phone. And when I broke up with my first missus, he was incredibly supportive to me on the phone, but he was quite adamant that I should move back to America. I had custody of my kids, and he really thought they should be raised in America, that I should get them the hell away from the UK for one thing, and also from their mother for another thing. Now, you see, I grew up without knowing my dad, and the last thing I would ever do would be to put my kids through a similar experience by taking them off to America and making them grow up without knowing their mom. So there was no way I was going to move to America. And I explained my rationale to my dad, and he understood it, or seemed to, but didn't agree. And ever since I wouldn't move back to America on his insistence that I ought to, he had become more distant again. He seemed to think that I had something personal against the United States of America, which isn't really true at all. And he also seemed to think that I favored Britain over America as a better country, which is also not true. I love the UK. I love living in the UK. And I think that the UK has an awful lot going for it. But I wouldn't say it's a better country. It's just different. Different in some good ways and different in some bad ways. It swings and roundabouts to me. Anyway, I digress. My point basically is, so since about 1995 or 6, my natural father never really was approving of me remaining in this country. I mean, while I was married to someone here, he could understand it a bit better. And when I was married to my second wife, we were together from like 96 till 2005. And so he sort of put up with me being here, but constantly kept on dropping hints and stuff that I should move back to America. And I think the fact I never came back to America was something which mattered to him a lot more than I realized while he was alive. Anyway, but it got to a point while I was with my second missus where I wasn't calling my dad very often anymore. I had been in this country for such a long time. I would call him every year. I would call him on his birthday. I would call him on Christmas, and I might call him once or twice in between, but that was about it. And you got to keep in mind that my dad had cancer off and on since early 1987. And so he was probably working up a pretty big grudge towards me for not keeping in touch with him all the times that he was ill and nearly dead. But, in my own defense, I will only say that my dad was in hospital nearly dead many times and never even let me know that he was in a perilous condition. So, yeah, there was at least a dozen times my dad was within, a few breaths of death in a hospital. And neither him nor his wife called me to let me know that he was even very sick, much less that close to dying. So yeah, like I said in my other video, the saw cuts both ways. I can only take responsibility for my half of the lack of communication and the resulting apparent antipathy that came from it. But that's the gist of it. That's the history. Okay, there's not much more to it than that. And this has gone on way longer than it should have, so I'm going to end it there. Thanks for watching. If you stuck in this long, take it easy.